Wake up, everybody. It's time for the History You Forgot podcast, a podcast where these three veteran teachers with over 90 years of teaching experience catch you up with the stuff you slept through when you were younger. Today, it's a Cold War. It's brr. Get ready for it. Coming at you next. I'm Jason Schmoida.
I'm Jason Jones.
And I'm Jeff Breedlove. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us. I liked your little Cold War opening.
Told you, I'm off my game today.
It's a cold open.
But hey, don't be cold about smashing that like button
That's
and that
right.
share
That's
and all
right.
the buttons to help us out get those
Yeah.
1,000 followers.
Yeah, we're trying to get up to 1,000.
We're hoping that Instagram and TikTok, we can get to 1,000, and we want to push subscribers here at YouTube and on Spotify as well. We feel like we're finally getting a little momentum, and we just want to kind of push it. So if you guys could help us out, it'd be beautiful.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Please.
So you'll notice we've got the fancy cups, right? This is what happens when you're old. You like an accumulation of every kind of drink glass known to man. What we're drinking today is a Moscow Mule, boys. So vodka and ginger beer, 2 parts vodka, 1 part ginger beer, and a whole lot of lime. The copper glass, the story behind it. It's funny because Moscow we chose clearly the Cold War, but it's actually kind of one of these weirdly, I don't know if it's true or not, mythological stories. There's a guy in LA who basically buys into Smirnoff vodka, right, which is an American-made vodka. There's a guy who brews ginger beer, and neither one of them can kind of get people to buy their product. And they come across some lady who's like Russian, I believe, and her dad owns like a copper cup factory. And so they come together, I think, and they develop to try to sell more vodka, sell more ginger beer, and to get rid of all these copper mugs. So
You said it earlier. It's like, oh, my peanut butter got in your chocolate. My chocolate got in
if you guys are old enough, remember the commercials? They walk up to the corner and one guy's eating chocolate, and he's like spooning, and they go, oh, right.
That's right.
2 things are better than one.
Well, it worked. They sell a lot more volume.
Yeah, exactly.
And now everybody, probably has the copper glasses for whatever reason.
Well, and the funny thing is that it was 1940s, which is the perfect time for kind of where we are. But I in my mind, I was wondering does that have anything to do with the Cold War in Russia? And the funny thing is, no, it was just coincidental.
Yeah.
And during the 50s, when the McCarthyism stuff was, which we'll probably address at some point here, like this kind of went out of fashion. People didn't want to be associated with it, which I think is kind of funny.
It is, because when I was doing some research looking for, actually, I came across a site that had every president's favorite drink.
Oh, fun.
And I'm like, oh, well, this will be easy, right? Well, Eisenhower and Truman. So Truman was bourbon. I'm like,
We
so
like
we
that.
get behind that guy. And Eisenhower, is like beer. So it's like, it's just, but he was a heavy smoker, so we can all, pay it on there.
Okay.
So anyway, yeah. So Moscow Mule, gentlemen, to the episode.
There we go.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Mm.
And here's the thing.
That's refreshing for a cold winter day.
I was going to say, this would be so much better in July than February, but it's good.
It is
So good.
But but we're filming this in July.
Right.
All right. So I think we're going to go ahead and set it up. When we last episode, we ended with the Cold War. No, 2 episodes ago was the Cold War. Last episode,
we finished World War II. 2 episodes, we finished World War II.
Yeah. We're all having
This is what we're talking about the Cold War today.
We got to do a plug for Nariva, right? Like let it
I'm
across
not
the
editing
screen on the
that
bottom.
either. I'm leaving that.
No, totally. Senior moments around the table. 2 episodes ago, we ended World War II, and then just the last episode was kind of out of chronological time, right? And we did kind of just
Imperialism.
yeah, might make right, I guess you could call it. So we decided to go back and get a little bit more on track chronologically. So remind you, we're going to do a little bit of context. So the episode hopefully is going to give you a little background. We're going to tell you the 2 or 3 sort of maybe 3 or 4 most significant sort of events, people of the Cold War. Okay. And then we will kind of wrap it up with what it all means and set it up if we continue to go forward. But I think we're going to try to give it a nice little...
Yeah, we won't cover the whole
succinct,
Cold War.
right.
We're going to get right up to about 1960. I think it's right around that time.
Right.
period.
So JFK.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
And,
So
and really, I think we kind of ended with VE Day, right? We never quite got to the end of the war with Japan.
I think
That's true. I think we really quickly went. I mean, we did mention
because we
war
wanted
with
it
the bomb, but
yeah.
Okay.
I'd have to go back. And we should have probably watched it. Should have watched that. Seems like we
We're
talked about
busy
it, but it was very brief.
and old. No, I
Yeah.
think you're right. I think we mentioned it. So we'll kind of do a little context with typically, as you think about the war, there are three, maybe four, but three really big sort of wartime conferences. What do you want to say?
Well, we want to get into like maybe why we fear communism first.
Let's do it.
Just to set
I
all
like
of
that.
this
Yeah,
up.
it's a good one.
You know, like there is I know in my classes when I teach, why do we fear communism? No one will raise their hand and answer. Now, these are students that are a lot younger than us. We grew up in it. We know,
It's
like,
Ivan
we
Drago,
get it,
right?
It's Ivan Drago, that's right. But it's an economic term, right? And the concept of communism is one where the government controls all means of production, what things cost, et cetera. The capitalist system is a hands-off system where the supply and demand determines everything. Somewhere in between is reality, right? Because there's really no such thing as a pure capitalist system. There's no such thing as a pure command system, and somewhere in between. But as you grow further and further towards communism, you get more government control, which I think is the natural thing for us that are free market people would look at and say, you don't want too much control over it. The market has to remain free.
Right.
But then the real debate is, how far one way or the other can you actually go? When you add Joseph Stalin to fist hitting the
that's,
table,
I think, where it goes off.
that's, I think, a big part of it. And when you realize that there are American spies in the late 40s, early 50s, and we start uncovering some of these things like the Soviets, that really, to me, that really intensifies it. And that makes communism a worse political presence than it is economic. I don't even think a lot of people think of communism as economic.
I don't think they do either. I just happen to be teaching this. We're doing 19th century Europe, right? This kind of came up today, and everyone always associates the USSR. And I'm like, well, kind of. You know, I mean, like, but I do think it starts too, that ideological shift. You know, remember that Russia is allied with the U.S. in both, right, World War I and World War II. So we clearly don't fear it when we need an ally. But I think it's that kind of fear of the unknown, right? I mean, in theory, 1917, Russia is the first country to sort of go down that path. And I think that most Western democracies were so fragile that communism was another sort of what if question mark that nobody really knew. And it is a threat, right? Because it's kind of anti-capitalism democracy in a sense. So that I think people feared that part of it. No one knew what it would do or how deeply it would take root. So I think some of it is that unknown piece as well.
And this really, what we're talking about really theoretically is the second Red Scare. The first was in the United States, at least during the 1920s.
Right. So I think, and I think that's important. And the ideological divide, then Cold War is where I think you end up then with this communism and socialism kind of getting this bad rap in terms of, bad words, us, them.
Right.
But I think that's kind of
oppressive.
With the idea that China, the Soviet Union are both aiding people that we have boots on the ground fighting against.
For sure.
So absolutely. So that's a good point.
That's great.
So I think if we start with the conferences, right? If you look, there's a few of them, right? We'll start with, Yalta, which is kind of the first time the big three meet. I guess Tehran a little bit in there too, but when they kind of figure out the war is about to end, right? They know it's imminent. So you've got the US, USSR, and Great Britain all together, and they're going to try to hash out the end of the war, what Europe will look like post-war. And they're kicking around all sorts of ideas about how to manage Germany and the idea of self-determination, right? That all of this territory that had been part of empires and had been then under German hostility and then now falls under Russian territorial control. Because remember, at the end of the war, Russia had kind of pushed all the way west. Is so all that territory is in contention. Like, what do we do with it? Do we set boundaries, right? And so we go into it with this sort of how do we end the war? It doesn't really end anything concretely. It sort of sets the tone for the next two. They also talk about the UN as a gray sort of blob of something of collectivism out there, right? So I think that when they talk about that, Yalta is the beginning of the end of the war. And then it's going to shift, right? Because we're going to hit a couple more, right? We're going to. You said the next one you thought was important was Cairo.
Well, I think it is so. The Yalta is important, sets so much of the framework up for whether it's the UN or whether it's
Right.
the decision to kind of how we handle Europe or how we finish the war with Germany and Japan. But then Cairo sets up Asia. And I've always wanted to mention, I always thought it was important to mention that because this is where Korea was promised its independence.
Right.
This is where China was given back all the territory that had been claimed by Japan. And so the two hotspots that will, to this day,
Right.
include is Taiwan for China and obviously Korea, which is in a ceasefire that ended in 1953, right? I mean, they're still in essence in that situation.
And also, real fast, chronologically, Taiwan isn't a thing yet, right? Because it's communists haven't even.
Right.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that was the island of Formosa, which had been occupied by the Japanese, given back to China. And it's actually in 1949 where Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists flee. So it gives us that point. It's like just taking a look at the map and how that's going to play out. I think it's kind of interesting to mention that at least. But there's not much to it other than that. But that one's, to me, it's kind of important.
Well, I guess the question I have for you of Cairo is that when Japan clearly loses the war, right, they've got most of China during the war, right, under their control. But it also kind of calls a halt to the rise of the communists in China, right? There's like a break during the war. There's still skirmishes, but they're fighting the Japanese.
Correct.
And now they're now that the war is over and the Japanese are retreating, it kind of brings up this political possible civil war again, which turns into a civil war.
And there's a democratic effort there as well.
There is. And I don't know the time frame of all that, but I do know, that communist movement in China does precede this.
Yeah, it starts in the 20s and 30s. And then there's because all that long marches, I mean, it's right after the war, before the war, but I know again with the timing. But yeah, it's something, and there's a couple different waves of it, right? There's a first wave, and then there's a break, and then the Japanese retreat after the war kind of sets it up again. And then that's when the U.S. starts, and we'll talk about that, but the U.S. starts getting involved or not involved or however you want to look at it. Yeah. So Cairo sets up Asia. And then probably, what do you think the next
Potsdam.
one is? Oh, okay. Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, for sure.
So Potsdam is a really interesting meeting because right in the middle of this meeting, you've got a British election. And so you've got Winston Churchill, who's led them through the war, right? You've got Winston Churchill sitting there at this meeting with at that point, Truman, because President Roosevelt had passed away.
It's Truman's first conference with them all, too.
And one thing that's really fascinating about Truman being there is he was not Roosevelt's third term vice president, right? And he has really only been in office for 2 or 3 months.
A couple months.
And Roosevelt dies. And so now he's supposed to be caught up on this war, right? That has gone on for 5 years. And so, and I guess you could argue, he did a pretty good job of being caught up. I mean,
he came in like thunder.
And so then of course you had Stalin. But then in the middle of this, you have a gentleman by the name of Attlee, who is elected prime minister of Britain. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, but I think he was already there. And then Churchill left, I think, or he was in the ballpark.
I think there's like a week that the conference is going on, and then they call a halt, because there's a general election, in Great Britain, and then Churchill loses.
Just kind of wild, right?
So he leaves,
not just the middle of the war, but in the middle of a war conference, even.
Well, and the United States, remember, had just elected a president to 4 terms because they didn't want to get rid of the guy who knew what was going on.
Was it don't change horse midstream or whatever they say?
Exactly. But at Potsdam, they're going to do several things. They're going to decide that Germany and the city of Berlin, its capital, need to be divided up and occupied until Germany can get on its feet, I guess. And Stalin, of course, was a big proponent of, if you're not there, you're not involved, or you're not, you don't have any ownership. So they divide Berlin in half. There's 3 sectors on the west side of Berlin that are for France, France, Great Britain, and the United States. And then the east side is the Soviet side. Same with the country. There's 3 sectors, democratic sectors, in the one half of the
Soviet
state
sector.
This is going to be a great place for a map insert.
Right.
Because because I think, like you're saying, is people don't realize that the city of Berlin, which had been the capital, sits wholly within the Soviet sector.
Yes.
So they're carving up a city within a Soviet. And so a lot of that city will be democratic, but within the Soviet sphere.
And the idea was that they would cooperate with each other.
Right.
When they don't, that looks very strange.
Strange. And then the other piece of this that you've got going on during the Potsdam conference is that Churchill and Truman have been talking about the atomic bomb, and they've not been sharing that information with Stalin. And he catches wind of that during this meeting, and it makes him very, very angry. And then, of course, the United States chooses to use the bomb.
Well, does Potsdam kind of end abruptly? Like, once we find out we have the bomb, don't we? Like, all right, we're not really going to. And I mean, we don't go all the way to the, because we like something.
Well, and we wanted the Soviet help until we knew we had the bomb.
Right.
And then
we issued a formal warning to Japan from Potsdam saying terrible thing can happen if you don't end this now. Like we possess a massive, they were hinting without saying that they were hinting at it. And Stalin was so mad about it that he refused. So back in Yalta had promised free elections to his sections of Europe and the other countries that he was influencing in Europe. And he went back on that. Saying, no, we're not having free elections in Europe, which means he was going to kind of clamp down on that. You could tell he was pissed, right?
Yeah, clearly. And there's another good map insert.
Right.
Because it kind of creates this sphere of influence for them in what now is Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So and that conference is interesting too, because the war in Europe was over during Potsdam.
Right.
So you really are
like,
now we're piecing together Europe, talking about Japan. You'd mentioned they wanted Stalin to come to Asia. But once we actually decide to use the bomb, we don't want him there anymore, which is interesting when we talk about
which is crazy because he shows up.
He shows up.
He tries to he thinks about it. Right.
The next kind of is the natural next step, unless is that I
mean, I was going to say, I think what the next step is, well, clearly, right, the U.S. possesses the weapon, and the warnings to Japan are unheeded, right? So we end up dropping two bombs, right, over
August,
3 days.
August 6th and 9th.
Hiroshima and then Nagasaki. But, after the first bomb, nobody believes that we have a second bomb. So, nobody stands down, right? Japan continues to, say the war is on.
And we didn't have any really idea how much destruction it was going to.
That's just it.
What was it? The first mile from the epicenter.
The numbers are staggering.
It was total destruction, but it was out to 10 or 15. Yeah, I mean,
well, and I guess I don't know if it's common sense or not, to be honest with you. But you think 3 days, couldn't Japan have surveyed the damage and decided to go ahead and surrender? And I don't know that 3 days was enough. Here's what we do know, which I think is super interesting. Between August 6th and August 9th, the Soviets began to make their way into China.
Right.
And
fully aware.
We're going to go get our claim. This is going to be over soon. We need to go ahead and, hey, we're going to help you out. You've been wanting us to help you out. We're going to go ahead and help you out.
Right.
And at this point, Truman and everybody, no, we don't want you to help. And speculation, and at least theory, would be that second bomb was kind of hurried in order to keep the Soviets
and it was more of a sign.
Right.
But I think also, because remember that when Stalin decides not to hold free elections, his argument is possession is 9/10 of the law. Like, we have it, it's ours. So what are you going to do about it? So I think the fear is too, when he marches into China, that the same rationale, like, well, we're here, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And it's huge and prosperous and resource rich. And so, yes, within a couple of days, we got the second bomb, but we film it. I mean, both bombs, right? We make sure that it's on film. We make sure the world knows, it's clearly a signal to everybody, but definitely the Soviet Union.
Well, and then we go back after the war and we keep testing it in our own, in Nevada with our own soldiers.
That shows you how little we do.
Yeah. I love those videos you see him was like standing there with like ski goggles, right? And they're like, wind, like winds back and
they're in U.S. fatigues.
Yeah, I would love to know what the rate of.
Years ago, I saw an interview with the last surviving member of one of those groups that got sent in, as if we dropped an atomic bomb in Moscow, let's practice now. How can we invade? And that's what they were doing. And this guy was like 67. He looked like he was 80.
Right.
And he was like, within months to years, everybody was dying.
Right. For sure.
And here's this guy who made it somehow till 67, which is crazy. But
we'd love to know what the stats are on that, like survivability of all those people who were just, basically nuked. Right? For weeks. So the war is over.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And now these conferences need to get kind of dropped into place. And how do we do that? Kind of becomes a thing. And right around this time, I mean, this season, right, Churchill makes a speech right? Comes to Westminster, right? Here in the good old state of, or next door to the state of Missouri. Yeah, Fulton, Missouri, goes to Westminster College, and he makes a speech, and he uses the phrase, an iron curtain has descended across Europe. And he's referring to this sort of ideological split, right, between the Soviet sphere on the east and what eventually becomes sort of a U.S. sphere on the west, right, the democracy. And so you end up now with this divide, both metaphorically, but you have to remember, too, that they build, barbed wire fences and they close it off to people going back and forth. People are not allowed to leave. The city of Berlin ends up getting, closed off, and that's a whole separate story.
Right.
Ironically, just popped in my head, I had a kid today in class when we mentioned Marxism and communism. His dad is Bulgarian and came here pre-89. So the kid was asking, like, so wait, my dad says, and I go, look, your dad's correct. And it was, the sphere. And he was like, and it kind of clicked in the kid's head. All of a sudden, that's like, pulls the strand.
It would have been hard to leave at that time.
Yeah, he told me that his grandparents had to apply for some long-term, like, student visa, and they only sent his dad. Like, everybody else had to stay. And that's, I think, what they did, right, is that they held the family back so that if the kid did anything wrong on the West or didn't come home, then the family was hostage. But he was 17 when he left and came to the U.S. And so I thought that was, it's always this great stories like that in the classroom.
Yeah,
There's always those. So,
for sure.
So, and before we move past that, because you mentioned the Iron Curtain, and the Soviet Union really put satellite governments in those countries and really controlled those countries for several decades.
Oh, yeah. And part of it is going to become, there is going to be this military alliances, right, that are going to come up out of it. But a lot of it is as a result, and we were talking about this earlier, is that the U.S. then sort of has steps into Western Europe after the destruction and comes up with the Marshall Plan, right? Which I think the equivalent today, I did the math, is like $235 billion of aid.
I think it was billions back then.
It was like 15 billion at the time. And when staggering amount of money. And they offered to the Soviets, and they refuse along, sort of U.S. is this hegemonic monster, and we're not going to take their aid. Look good for us because we offered it.
That's an interesting what if, though. What if they accepted the aid?
Yeah.
Not that it would have been in their best interest to do it, I guess, but if they had, does that change the entire dynamic of the thing? I don't know. It's an interesting thought.
It at least would appear as friendship.
Right.
Which we had.
Right. There'd be
during the war. Right. I mean, I think a lot of that comes from, you'll get that race to Berlin at the end, too, right? When the Soviets beat us, right? You end up with that sort of beginning of that split. And I think, isn't this all those stories of the Soviets, like, dismantling factories and, like, that part of Germany and those part of those states and kind of moving them into the Soviet Union so they create really a buffer zone is what those satellite states become.
The imagery of it all is really cool. You have the Iron Curtain, and you have literally lines being drawn, these political lines, which we've talked about. We talked about in the last episode, kind of how that works. It's all just, what do you expect, or what do you agree to, and what do other nations recognize? But you literally could take a marker to a map or a globe, and you could kind of line out the world. And in international relations, we talk about a unipolar, a bipolar, or a multipolar situation in the world. This is the bipolar example. This is where countries all over every continent kind of line themselves up with the United States or the Soviets, and they're literally, if you got an army, they're either packed with Soviet weapons or they're packed with American weapons. And it's really the visual and the political of it are so interesting. And
so, Jason, before we move past this, because it was mentioned, tell us about the Marshall Plan.
Well, that was
like CBS Sunday Morning with Jason Jones.
That's right.
So the bigger picture to me that sets up so much of what we're going to talk about here is the Truman Doctrine and the concept behind that. So it gets a little bit off of our outline here, but
he's ignoring my question.
I know.
The Marshall Plan? No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
We'll get there, Mr.
It started with Greece and Turkey. So before there was a Marshall Plan, there was Greece and Turkey. And Greece and Turkey were in economic turmoil, and the Western powers realized that the Soviets very easily could move in that direction of the Mediterranean towards Greece and Turkey.
Well, they're always looking for warm water ports.
Mediterranean access. It's perfect for them, and it would be better if we could preserve it. So we literally dumped billions of dollars into Greece and Turkey, as per Truman giving a speech to Congress saying, we need to give aid to those countries that are opposing communism, and these are the two right now that are at the most danger. We gave them a buttload of money, and guess what? It kind of worked. It kind of got them out of their debt, and it helped. And,
and
that speech even literally is what we call the Truman Doctrine. That's where that notion comes from. George Kennan called it containment. Right. But the idea was we need to stop this. So the next step then was the Marshall Plan was like, okay, what if we did that for all of these countries?
So Marshall Plan comes after Greece and Turkey. That's what I was trying to figure out.
Yeah, okay. Greece and Turkey came first and really set the stage and gave people the idea that this could work. We're the only country that's flush. We're not rebuilding. Our economy by 1947, 48 already, we realized we missed a good recession. We're in great shape. And we're just dishing it out.
Remember, the thought is that communism steps into economic turmoil and people who are unemployed and angry with their governments and can't, blah, 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 prices of goods is, hyperinflation.
Yeah.
That's when this idea is that, so we're basically buying, democracy or capitalism. It's literally dumping money to prevent it from happening.
Which is interesting because from our perspective, that's the grand gesture, right? We go in and we've got money. We're going to spend money. We're going to have influence. That's very globalist, right? That's very interventionist. And if you're Stalin sitting on the other side, you're looking at this going, you're the aggressor. You are coming in and buying your way into Europe. And then when we create NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty, which is a military alliance of all the Western nations, and that sort of forces Stalin's hand to create the Warsaw Pact, his narrative very clearly to the Russian people is the United States are the aggressor. We have to protect ourselves from them. And you can see it that way. I'm not saying it's right. I don't want to get into that. I don't want to get those comments. But you can see that perspective. It was, it wasn't a huge sell, to be honest.
And the Warsaw Pact was pretty much a forced pact.
Yeah, they had no choice.
You're in the satellite states, you're in the Iron Curtain, and you're going to be a part of this.
It's because we need you to be now. Yeah.
Well, it's a buffer.
Buffer states.
Missiles in those states aimed at the West, and we put missiles aimed at the East, right?
Yeah.
And so it literally is both a physical as well as ideological divide, right? And I think that people, it's hard if you were not alive at that time, like we were, to come of age with that. I mean, I fully remember every movie, right? Every bad guy was a communist. Rambo and Schwarzenegger and all those guys fought that constantly. It was always set up. Even, Bond, it was always sort of like that.
Yeah.
But it was also, you lived in this sort of heightened state of tension that there was always going to be something, right? Because at the Cold War, it was literally just this heightened tension for 40 years. It's just going to start in the 40s and 50s. But I mean, it continues all the way.
And it's a little before our time. At least I never did it in high school, but the old duck and cover that we showed in class, right? And where they're talking about a nuclear attack.
I remember having drill. I didn't show the old 50s video, but absolutely.
We had a shelter in my grade school, in my elementary school. We went down and we practiced getting up against the wall, and it wasn't really duck and cover, but we did that.
But it was the same equivalent.
Yeah.
But I think the interesting thing about this too is that we've also at this time created the UN, right? And now following the League of Nations debacle, right, with the UN and the US doesn't join, we do, right? So now we're in, even the headquarters is in New York, right? So but it is set up in such a way that it kind of shoots itself in the foot a little bit, right? You've got member states, and then you have this sort of, was that general delegates?
Security Council.
And then you have the Security Council made up of the victors of World War II plus China.
Yeah. Right.
And they're able to vote and then, but also overrule and veto the general session. And then any one of them can at any time veto anything, right? So any one vote. It just kind of
the League of Nations, remember too, didn't have any power, right? And so you said debacle, and it truly was a debacle, right? When all of it started happening there, heading towards war, they could do nothing about it.
Right.
And so now you've got the UN that at least has forces. Different states have committed money and people and machines and ammunition and everything. So it at least had some teeth, right? Which
the baby blue helmets, peacekeeping.
And if you think about it, so what we call the modern liberal world order is coming into fruition. You have the UN, which encompasses all countries of the world where everybody can have a say. You have military alliances like NATO and the Warsaw Pact kind of dividing the earth into two.
Right.
Again, that concept of the bipolar world is so clear there. It does get intensified.
Right.
The funny thing is that This is actually a fairly safe world that we're living in right now. Once we get to a certain point, but it has to get to a very dangerous point before we can see that.
So,
Which is kind of wow. And I think we're on pace to kind of lay that out.
Explain that.
Can I wait till we get there?
So I think
I want to take the Truman Doctrine a little further first, but yeah.
Oh, you
Well, no.
well, so what you're talking about is the Berlin Wall,
Yeah, absolutely.
and the Berlin Wall.
So money to Greece and Turkey, the Marshall Plan, and then that gets us right to that Berlin, which explain that. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
The
so-
blockade. You're talking about the first one? Yeah.
So
There.
the Soviet Union is going to block off all routes into West Berlin.
Mhm.
In frustration just over the whole relationship between the West and themselves. And they're literally going to, they being the West, the U.S. and Britain primarily, are going to airlift. I think the original plan was somewhere around 3,500 tons of supplies a day.
Yeah.
And it ended up being more like 12,500 tons of supplies a day for over a year. Right. Well, I think it was just over a year.
It was either 11 months or 13 months. It was one.
Yeah.
It was. I can't remember.
Was it like they're landing and taking off like
every 15 minutes?
Right. I was going to say like that's like
24 hours a day.
crazy when you see the numbers.
So if you can imagine being here in Kansas City, Overland Park, Leawood, and having huge parachutes popping
Not that
open.
we're like putting a pinpoint on that we're filming.
But huge parachutes opening up with pallets of food and supplies dropping into our neighborhoods.
Yeah, well, it's really kind of forcing the Soviets' hand, right? We're calling it bluff.
Right. They think we'll just give in.
Yeah.
Well, it's not worth the fight.
Right.
But
roughly a year in, what are you going to do? At some point, you got to all right, fine.
And
keep the roads open.
Right.
You probably still teach us. Isn't there like some great story about like an American pilot who, whenever he would fly in, like the German kids would stand and he would drop candy from the airplane, and so that became sort of known as. I mean, we were like really like dropping candy from the kids. It was kind of
that's pretty good.
I remember that. And anecdotally, in '89 when I graduated college, Buddy and I went into a still communist part, right? And you would take the train from the West, and then they would train, and then when you would cross into the East German part of, they literally like wrap the plane in cellophane, right? Because nobody's going to get off or on, right? This train is going to bullet to the night and pull up in West Berlin, right? So, and they switch out the guards and then you wake up in the morning and like, voila, we're still in the West, right? It's like you just go through this tunnel of communism.
That's wild.
So, I mean, the wall came down right after that.
But that would have been the first real tense moment that could have led to World War III or another conflict.
Yeah. Think about the amount of money we have spent. Greece and Turkey, Marshall Plan, Berlin Airlift. You just explained it. Like that is an enormous amount of money the United States has invested in all of this. And it's all in the name of the Truman Doctrine. And it all kind of comes to this really screeching halt with two things that happen within a month of each other, right? First, we get wind that the Soviets have exploded a bomb.
Right,
1949. I want to say August to like the 1st of October, somewhere in there. The Soviets, we find out they're dropping the bomb, or that they have one. And then like a month, it's like right at a month, I think, isn't it? When China falls.
Yeah, and they've been fighting a war between the nationalists, Kuomintang, Chiang Kai-shek, and Mao Zedong for ever since World War II ended. Right, but the Japanese, it kind of rekindled that nationalists versus communist war.
Yeah.
The U.S. has tried to keep themselves neutral, but is funneling money and weapons and advisors to the nationalists, trying to keep it from becoming communist without being overtly part of the fighting.
Right.
No one really knows again, right? What's going to happen? I mean, how does this will be the first sort of test of a country choosing. So clearly we don't want it to go badly for us. And it does. I mean, eventually, right, the forces of Mao kind of push Chiang Kai-shek and the National South. They flee first to like the southern part of China. And at that point, the U.S. is like, yeah, we're out. Like they don't want to push this into another conflict.
And the aggression that you saw with the Truman Doctrine up to that point in time, all of a sudden is like,
Well, because
Well, then,
you push it to the war. I mean, it's like, how
Right.
far will you take this?
Right.
the nationals end up in what we call Taiwan today.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yes.
And I think they even called themselves for a while the Democratic
So they are
Republic of China.
The Republic of China versus
Republic
the
of
People's
China
Republic
versus
of China.
China.
So
Yeah.
it's that whole axiom where like the less democratic you are, the more times you put democracy or republic in your name. Right?
Yeah.
Like the German
Yeah.
Democratic Republic is the communist one, right?
Right.
So they flee, and then the Soviets and the Chinese become sort of best buddies on that, which scares the U.S. We then kind of back the nationalists, but even today, right? I mean, China still does not recognize Taiwan formally.
Right.
It's still a breakaway republic. Like that Strait of Taiwan is always sort of a flashpoint.
Yeah. And we kind of do, kind of don't.
Yeah,
That's one of the more
we
fascinating
help,
policies in all of
absolutely. We help them out, but well,
Yeah.
now now it clearly we can't upset China either. I mean, like, but that's the whole sort of interplay, this delicate dance for the next 40 years
Yeah.
is how do you,
Well,
Yeah, I think it may have been the 70s when we started. We started literally calling this strategic ambiguity.
right,
Like that's how we
Right,
defined the
just enough
policy.
to stop.
and the communists taking over in China is going to lead to us with our boots on the ground in Asia in 1950, right?
Yes.
So the
Absolutely.
Korean conflict, right? So and us trying to keep all of Korea from becoming communist.
Yeah.
And like
God,
you
that's
said,
right.
there's still technically a war.
It's a ceasefire technically, right? There's just
Right.
that demilitarized zone. It's insane the way that has just stalled. I
When the
think.
war lasts, what? I think
3 years.
3 years, but
Yeah.
if you don't end a series MASH, like it's about it. The series lasts like 3 times as long as the actual war does.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that would be really sort of the first time the U.S. has set, like you said, boots on the ground
Mhm.
and chosen a side.
One, it was we did actually face Chinese soldiers.
Right.
Yeah.
As I was saying,
Once we
China
approached
took the
close
side
enough,
of North
yeah.
Korea, right, and we took the side of the South.
Yeah. Do we need to like? I can do this in like 2 seconds
Do
if
what?
you want. Well, the United States jumped into that
Do it.
war to try to protect the last piece of the South Korean peninsula called the Pusan Perimeter, and then MacArthur genius idea to invade Incheon and go into North Korea, and that changed the tide. You put us in kind of the lead, but we pushed too far to the Chinese. The Chinese got in the war. We
Right.
bogged down for 3 years, and eventually
Right.
Truman was never able to get us out of there. Eisenhower will pretty quickly because basically Stalin dies. In a
Well,
nutshell.
yeah, Stalin dies in 53,
Mhm.
and the Chinese, economically can't keep funneling. They don't have the industrial economy yet that the rest of them do. But nobody wants this war to go on. I mean, it's
Right.
kind of been in a stalemate. And then, it is still, right, the DMZ, the demilitarized zone along, what is that, the 49th parallel, is still the last sort of remnants of that Cold War. I mean, there's still literally a wall, and there's still soldiers on one side and soldiers on
We
the
always
other.
call it just a police conflict, right? We never called
Yeah,
it a war.
we haven't declared war
I
since
don't
World War
know.
II.
Right.
Oh, really?
We have not
Korea
declared.
doesn't count as a war?
We did not declare
I
war.
thought they called it the police
Yeah.
I knew
Police action.
action.
It was there was a UN resolution. Even it's the first time the UN actually acted collectively. Technically,
I
there
didn't think I
was,
knew that.
which is it's interesting.
We
Well,
get
so
out of
then I
there in
guess-
53, and then
Yeah, Stalin dies in 53. Now Khrushchev has taken over.
Stalin dies. That cuts off funding. And Eisenhower's election. I probably
Right.
should mention, like,
54.
he ran on that. I mean, he
Yeah,
ran
yeah.
in 52 on getting out of the Korean War. He did not want to fight limited wars like this. And that will change a little bit our philosophy on this Cold War moving forward
In
in
what
the
way?
50s. In the sense that he'll move away from the possibility of a limited war. He's going to load up nuclear weapons. You think of Eisenhower, this sounds dangerous, right? We're going to load up nuclear weapons, and he'll create a policy that becomes known as massive retaliation. Him and John Foster Dulles will
Right.
come up with this, which is what Dulles Airport's named after John Foster Dulles, right? And it's based on the concept of mutually assured destruction.
Right?
If I can totally destroy you and you can simultaneoously totally destroy me, we won't. And Eisenhower, being a guy who's fought through so many wars,
You have
like,
to remember that this was like the entire
Yes.
worldview of us. I mean, this was it.
but-
Right?
yeah,
Mr. Schmoyer, I mean, Eisenhower gets elected, and he doesn't want to fight these limited wars, but wasn't it I know we don't talk about Vietnam in the 50s, but in the mid 50s, weren't we already kind of committing
we were
aid
giving
and help?
aid, and we
We
were
had people
given
there,
some
didn't we?
training.
Yeah.
We had people. We were not engaged, We were not engaged in combat under Eisenhower. That was kind of a strict rule of his. He was not
Okay.
going to do that. In fact, if you do look at 8 years of Eisenhower, we don't really commit troops to much.
Okay.
Whether that's Hungary, which I know we're going to mention, or whether it's Korea, Vietnam. We started giving money because in Vietnam in 1954, the French left. And so we had to like fill that power vacuum, but we didn't put troops there until 1964. Really?
Okay. 10 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can kind of wrap. I mean, I think Hungary is a good place to kind of call this in the sense that the Warsaw Pact countries are clearly bristling, right, by the 50s under Soviet control. Yugoslavia under Tito has already somehow threaded a needle of being communist, but not under the boot, really.
Yeah.
And the Soviet Union is a little leery of how that's going to look, but nobody wants to risk another war.
Do you remember the old maps from like the 80s where all the communist countries were red, but yet somehow Tito's Yugoslavia was different color. And I remember like, well, they're communists, but they're kind of not. Like I never understood that.
And that was only because of Tito, which is why when Tito dies in 80, that whole country then falls into basic, long-term civil war, because he's the only thing that's sort of kept it connected, right? And that piece or whatever, it's like a Band-Aid coming off. But so the Hungarians, I mean, Poland has kind of been pushing a little around to kind of get some change, but Hungary is the first. A man named Imre Nagy is a progressive communist, and over the year, they've sort of been pushing for reform, right? Still communist, but less restrictive communism. And the Soviet Union at this time has kind of gone along with it. I mean, Khrushchev is not really sure post sort of how to deal with this. So a little bit, and Hungary finally, the Soviet Union is like, well, we're going to kind of watch this, threaten some things. It's Mao who actually convinces Khrushchev to send in tanks, because I think it's one of those now. It's like you're going to have to do something about this. And so, a 2-week period of student unrest always, right? Hungary is crushed, right? The Soviets roll, 11,000 tanks or something, into the city of Budapest, crush the rebellion, seize control again, install another puppet minister, Imre Nagy's, and a bunch of them are executed, right, as traitors. And the world kind of gets a symbol that, all right, so the Soviet Union is serious about keeping this Warsaw Pact. And that's kind of, I guess that's the last sort of big thing before Kennedy comes in.
All right.
I can't think of anything.
Yeah. I mean,
it's probably a good time to go.
Yeah, there's little bits and pieces of things, but I think that covers it. So if we want to roll back real quick and just kind of cover post-war conferences, right? That set up kind of that structure. And then the conflict intensified and the bipolar notion of the world kind of comes in order, and that gets worsened by Chinese fall. Well, the atomic bomb, the Soviets getting the atomic bomb, Chinese falling. Now we're in this nuclear age. Everybody's lined up between the two major powers. Slight little veer for the United States policy towards Eisenhower, which is just really putting nukes even further on the table, even though, theoretically that would be safer. It doesn't feel safer for sure.
Yeah, which is ironic, I think, because the 50s in American sort of lore is such a boom, leave it to beaverish kind of time, right?
Just the idea that you can blow us up 6 times and we can blow you up 5 doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me.
Yes.
It's a lot of money we've spent on nuclear weapons.
But if you think about, it's interesting, if you think about it, how many conflicts were avoided because we didn't want to push it that far. Even though we got involved in conflicts, they were all these little weird
proxy wars,
proxy wars and limited wars and stuff like that. But I don't know.
I would argue maybe it didn't. Did it keep us out of conflict, or did it just keep the Soviets out of the conflicts we were directly involved in, and vice versa?
Maybe true. Yeah, maybe true. That's it.
Wow.
Every once in a while.
Which I think brings us, is it your
I think it was my turn.
Who you want to have a beer with?
I do. Well, who I want to have a meal with?
A Moscow.
Yeah. You know what? It's hard because there's so many characters in this.
We've covered some ground,
right? And I'm going to go clear back to Truman. And what I think is so fascinating about Truman, one, I gave up where we're from, so he's from our local area.
Yeah.
But
you don't have the address out there.
No, well, not yet. But it is fascinating to me that a guy gets put on a ticket. They win the election. Within 2, maybe 3 months, Roosevelt's passed away, and now he's got to be in charge of this. And making decisions about using the atomic bomb to everything else that he had to decide. And obviously he's had to have had some awesome advisors and things like that. But I just think it'd be fascinating to hear his side of the story and in a candid way. This is, I was scared to death, and there's why, or whatever he would say.
And I think this would be it's a whole nother episode probably, but he and Roosevelt were not necessarily like buddies, right? It was kind of a last minute ad.
I don't think it seemed to me like I've always gotten the impression they just didn't know each other very well.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like they weren't like they just
it was just a good, safe, stable
Midwestern.
And maybe it'd be fun sometime to do a Truman's rise to political power.
Well, see, I was going to throw this in there quickly, if you guys don't mind. Like, I read this not too long ago. So we're from the Kansas City area. Truman was from the Kansas City area. Is a guy that brought Truman through the process named Tom Pendergast. Tom Pendergast was kind of the political boss of the Democratic Party in Kansas City. He kind of ran Kansas City for decades, several decades. And when Truman was heading to Potsdam to meet Stalin, he actually told somebody, he was like, I can handle Stalin. I've been dealing with Tom Pendergast my whole life. And it was like, yeah, that makes sense. You get that really strong, bold personality is going to pound his fist and yell. And you've done that before. So
wouldn't Stalin be another fascinating person to have? I mean,
at a distance.
but just think of the things you could talk to him about, right?
True.
Hey, you fought in 2 world wars.
Yeah.
Where you were part of the Allies, but you never really felt like you were part of the Allies, right? And just his thought processes and all of that,
I mean, there's a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
We could do a whole other podcast on what world leaders were in their first life. And it ultimately failed and then ended up going on to, become horrifically authoritarian.
Right.
I mean, there's a whole bunch of them that you kind of look at this and go, if only they had stayed a kindergarten teacher, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or a pitcher for the New York. I mean, like, the world be different. He's one of them. So,
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think, is that probably wrapping up?
What do we want to do? Are we going to keep the Cold War going, the 60s, 70s? Are we going to do that? Or?
Why don't, if you guys have an opinion, if you would maybe leave a comment for us, we're happy to kind of tailor make our shows to whatever it is that you guys want. But I think we naturally probably would be maybe 60s through the fall of the Soviet Union or something kind of, which is a lot to cover. But maybe kind of do it again, like in a class period. But if you have an opinion, let us know. And I think, on that note,
is it
class
time?
Dismissed?
Class dismissed. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah.
And I said cold.